I'm Samantha Reynolds, one of 6 police officers that make up the RH Police Department. I was born in RH, but when my parents died when I was 10, I was sent to live with my grandmother. My parents were amazing. I miss them a lot. They were the reason I got into law enforcement. Well, mostly Dad. He was a cop, my hero, so I decided that was what I was going to be. When I graduated from basic law enforcement training, I requested to be assigned to my dad's old station in RH. I thought I had done it to be closer to my dad. Now, looking back, the roots that drew me back to this town ran far deeper. The chief of police and my dad worked together in the RHPD when I was a kid. He actually attended my BLET graduation. I guess Grandma called him, because I barely remembered him. He called me when I put in my request to congratulate me on becoming part of the RHPD. I never even interviewed. I arrived mid-September, then spent the next month at a desk doing paperwork. It's standard procedure, Chief Theodore Walker had said. I know pushing the papers may not be what you had in mind, but you'll be out in the field soon enough. It was late October. I was finishing up filing some old paperwork when Walker asked to have a word with me. A little panic set in as I walked over to his open door and knocked. I must have messed up a report. I bit my lip, mentally preparing to get my ass chewed out. I stood and waited. Come in. The chief's voice beckoned, and I stepped into the room. The office was meticulously tidy, not a speck of dust to be seen. Everything from the paper clips on the desk to the pictures on the wall had its place. There was a rigid, hard feel to the room. Walker motioned for me to sit in one of the chairs at the front of his desk. I sat. The chair felt hard and cold underneath me. You wanted to see me, sir? I said, sitting up stiffly. Chief Walker was a big man, at nearly 6'5". Even seated, he towered over my 5'7" frame. He was broad-chested and muscled. He wore his dark hair cut tight, and his smooth, tan skin had a leathered look. His eyes were one of the things I noticed when I met him for the first time at graduation. One was a deep, rich brown, the same shade as my own. His other eye was a light gray, almost clear, as if the color was drained from it and left with only the outline of the iris in the pupil. Chief Walker looked across the desk at me, one brown eye, one gray, clearing his throat. Reynolds, I'm going to have you ride along with Fontaine on Friday. Halloween can get a little messy. Senior Officer Sergeant Jean-Marc Fontaine was a Louisiana native. His distinct Creole accent was easily recognizable in the halls of the station. I guessed Fontaine to be almost 40, but he had a youthful appearance and, admittedly, was extremely attractive. The dark blue of the uniform on his lean, muscular build complemented his fair skin and jet black hair. Standing at just over 6 feet, he was a commanding presence. On my first day, Fontaine had taken my hand in a firm handshake and smiled at me with bright, white teeth. We gonna be good friends, I think, he said as his green eyes glanced up and down at me, and I felt a twinge of irritation. He is really blatantly checking me out while we're on duty? What he said next confirmed that observation. About time we got something a little nicer to look at. He winked at me then, and I actually blushed. Damn, I'm in trouble. I needed to focus and keep things professional. Coming off like a lovesick schoolgirl wouldn't earn me any respect, nor did I care for any insinuations on my character if I expressed any interest in any member of the department. The last thing I needed was to be the station slut. Trying to redirect my mind back to work, I sat up a little straighter as the chief continued. Locals get a little rowdy. Kids egging cars and TPing houses. Normal stuff, you know. Halloween. Understood, sir, I said. Walker set his jaw. Jean-Marc already knows the situation. He'll be ready. I motioned to stand when Walker spoke again. Make sure you listen to what he says. Fontaine can keep you alive. I blinked, briefly taken aback by his words. What does that mean? I thought. Aloud, I said, Yes, sir, I will. Friday came. I reported to Sergeant Fontaine at his cruiser parked out back of the station. The sunlight was fading fast and leaving in its wake the orange, red, and purple of an autumn sky. Fontaine was leaning against the driver's side door of the cruiser, sunglasses perched on his head. When he spotted me, he grinned. "I was getting to think you were going to stand me up," he said. He pushed himself off the cruiser and began straightening his gun belt and vest. "Am I late?" I was puzzled and checked my watch. I was 10 minutes early. I heard Fontaine chuckle and felt my ears start to heat up a little. I took a deep breath, said a little prayer, and said, "Ready whenever you are, Sergeant." Once we were in the patrol car, Jean-Marc was all business. He spoke very little, and he kept it clean and to the point. Being the town was so small, the patrol area continued on an endless loop, and the first few hours seemed to drag. The night seemed to look as if it would be relatively uneventful, making me think about what Walker had said about my mentor keeping me alive. I do run a huge risk of being bored to death. It was about 11 p.m. when we stopped at a corner gas station for coffee and a bite to eat. Jean-Marc leaned against the cruiser, smoking a cigarette, as I came out of the gas station with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Those things will kill you, you know," I said flatly, handing him a cup of coffee. Anything can kill you, Cher," Fontaine said, smiling. He sauntered over to a nearby trash can, rolling the lit end of the cigarette between his thumb and forefinger, making sure it was out, and threw the butt in the trash. I was in the passenger seat as Fontaine slid into the driver's side when the dispatch radio crackled. 1083, 1083. We have a disturbance out at JR's tavern. Reports of some drunken disorderlies. Officer needs backup. It's Louise. He's by himself. Jean-Marc lifted the handset to his mouth. "Copy that, Gloria. Reynolds and I are on the way." "Be careful," said Gloria. "Copy that, ma'am. We'll be careful." Jean-Marc placed the handset back in its cradle and started the car. He turned to me and winked. "Looking like we're going to have a little fun after all, eh, newbie?" We pulled into the parking lot of JR's tavern and found Officer Luis Rodriguez standing with 3 men, looking like they had one hell of a fight. "You okay, Rigo?" Fontaine called out as we got out of the cruiser. "Mama's mighty worried about you, mon ami." Louise looked up and smiled. "Nah, JM, I'm good. Just trying to get the story straight with these knuckleheads." He gestured to the men. "Says they weren't fighting. Says they heard a noise and came out to investigate. Says they were attacked." "Attacked by what, you reckon?" Jean-Marc's gaze drifted over the men. "Anybody see you get attacked?" "Jean-Marc," one of the men said. "It had to be a bear or something. It was huge with sharp claws and—" Suddenly the man broke into tears, mumbling incoherently. "Honest, Fontaine," said the second man. "We heard some trash cans knocking and thought it might be some damn kids or something. Me, Sully, Jim over there, and Hank all came out. Then this thing comes out of nowhere." "It got Hank," Jim sobbed. "I watched him die. He got torn to bits." I shivered. I didn't know if I believed the story, but something sure as hell got them freaked out. I noticed Rodriguez and Fontaine were exchanging glances. After a moment, Louise nodded, and Jean-Marc undid his holster strap. "All right. How do I know y'all ain't lying?" the sergeant drawled. "Supposing we took a little walk around here and found old Hank's passed out in a garbage can or something." The third man stepped forward. I saw the sergeant's jaw clench and his green eyes harden. The man lifted his torn, bloody shirt to reveal a nasty injury to his side. Long, deep gashes spread across his middle. The flesh was flapped open in spots, and the pink of his muscle peeked through the ghost white of fat. "Damn," I thought. "Sir, we need to get you to the hospital." "Ain't no lie, Sergeant." The man's eyes were on Fontaine. "It was a bear, like the ones by the old railway, and the other side of the tracks." Fontaine and the third man matched glares. I could tell there was bad blood, and the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. A crowd started to gather outside the tavern. "Rigo," Sergeant said. Eyes not leaving the man. "Check the alley." The man put his shirt down and nodded towards me. "She smells fresh," he said with a smirk. I blinked, but before I could react, Fontaine rushed forward, bringing his face within inches of the man's nose. "Sticking your nose in the wrong places," Fontaine said coldly, "is why you ain't PD no more, Sully." The man sneered and took a step back. "Sergeant," Louise called from the alley, "there's something you should see." Fontaine raised his voice and addressed the crowd. "Time to head on home, folks. Party's over." Then to me, "Come on, Cher." I followed as Jean-Marc went around the side of the building. Halfway down, Louise was crouched, one hand on his holster, the other holding a flashlight, and was looking down at something. As we approached, he looked up and nodded his head. Slowly, my eyes adjusted to the dim light of the alley. When a severed human arm came into focus, my stomach lurched in response. "Oh my God," I gasped. "Blood's still warm," Rodriguez said. "There's more further down in the direction of the ridge." Fontaine nodded and pressed the radio on his shoulder. "Hey, Mama?" "I'm here. Did you find Louise?" "He's right here, Mama, don't you worry," he assured her, then continued. "We found an arm in the alley, and one of them boys from JR's is MIA. Can you put out an APB on Hank Edwards? See if he's lost an appendage?" "Copy that," Gloria's radio voice said. "Holy shit!" A voice came from behind, and all three of us spun, with our weapons drawn. Rodriguez pointed his flashlight down the alley. It was the man who spoke up after Ted had his breakdown. My heart pulsed, hard, in my throat. My tongue felt like sandpaper, and I still had that sick feeling in my stomach. There was also a faint buzzing sound in my head I couldn't shake. "Keep yourself together, Samantha," I ordered my brain. "Keep it together." "Damn it, Benny," Fontaine bellowed. "I told you and the rest of them assholes to go the hell home." "Is that Hank's arm?" Benny pointed down at the appendage. "Holy shit. Where's the rest of them?" "You deaf boy?" Fontaine moved towards the man. "It's time you get on home to your wife and let us handle this." The sergeant slowly put his gun away and went to place a hand on Benny's shoulder. The man flinched and staggered backwards. "Where the hell is the rest of them?" Benny demanded. "You need a hand over there, Fontaine?" I whirled as another man came into view, into the dark alley. It was the man called Sully. He looked at me. My gun pointed at his face, and smirked. "I saw him follow y'all in. He's too damn nosy for his own good," he said a little louder. Fontaine came over and eyed Sully. "Looks like he ain't the only curious critter out here tonight." The sergeant nodded towards Benny. "Take Benny and get him before I decide to put you in the back of the cruiser instead." Benny snapped his head towards us as Sully urged him back into the direction of the parking lot. "I can smell the blood," he said. "The blood is everywhere." A chill went down my spine. He was right. The metallic smell of blood was thick in the cold autumn air. "Get him home before he loses his mind," Fontaine growled at Sully. "And he better make it there." Sully visibly stiffened and nodded. I watched as the two men retreated. "You think that was a good idea, JM?" Rodriguez had come up to stand at Fontaine's side. "Shit smelt a foul since I got to the scene, and Sully just happens to be here." I smelt it too. Fontaine turned his head to spit. "But I can't have folks go loony on me, with whatever the hell did that running around." He looked back down at what was once presumably Hank's arm. I kept looking down the alley, making sure there wasn't anyone else joining us. I needed to get a grip on myself. The buzzing sound was louder now. I shuddered and forced my brain to focus on something else. I thought of the way Fontaine's whole demeanor changed whenever that Sully guy was around. "What's the deal with that guy?" I asked. "He used to be PD?" "He had a badge," Fontaine said flatly. "He don't know more." From the tone, it indicated the end of the conversation. "I'm calling for backup, and we need to secure the crime scene." He reached up to his shoulder and spoke into the talkie. "Gloria, we got a blood trail leading to the ridge. Send backup." "Copy that," Gloria responded. Then there was a brief pause before she spoke again. "Walker, Tyrell, and Davis are en route. I'll bring the van and secure the scene. Please be careful." Gloria wasn't just the night dispatcher. She was also the crime scene technician. both of which were part-time. Her real job was a medical doctor and the owner of the only family practice in town. She volunteered for the open dispatcher position when her son, Luis Rodriguez, joined the RHPD. He could not have been in better hands, Gloria had said, but a mama always worries about her babies. Fontaine looked up from the crouch he had assumed, while he was taking a closer look into the body. "You ready to go hunt and share?" he said with a smile. "Shouldn't someone wait for Gloria?" I worried about leaving sweet Gloria alone with the same things stalking about. The sergeant stood and stepped into my personal space. I sucked in a breath, suddenly very warm. "I ain't letting you out of my sight." The finality of his voice left whatever response in I had stuck in my throat. "Rigo," the sergeant said, not taking his eyes off mine. "Wait for Mama and then meet back up with us over the tracks." "Copy that," Louise said. Fontaine nodded. "We can't leave her alone out here with—" I started, not able to look away from the sergeant. "I wouldn't be leaving her alone out here if I didn't think she could take care of herself," Jean-Marc said. He was so close I could smell the scent of coffee, Old Spice, and Irish Spring soap. There was another smell. It was warm. The kind of smell you wanted to rub your face in. "Damn, Reynolds. What are you doing?" I straightened and forced myself to glower up at Fontaine. "I can take care of myself," I said flippantly, the words coming out more juvenile than intended. Fontaine raised an eyebrow and leaned in a little closer to me, his green eyes burning into my brown. "I'm sure you could, but I was told to keep an eye on your share. Just following orders." The sergeant turned, taking his gun from its holster. "Let's go, newbie." I stood there a moment, watching him walk away. "Idiot," I chided myself. "How about you get your daddy issues in check and do your damn job?" We came out of the alley, onto one of the 2 streets that ran along a set of railroad tracks. On the other side was what the locals called the Ridge. I'd never actually been over the tracks. Every time I drove past, the hairs on the back of my neck would stand up. The buzzing sound in my head was growing more insistent, and the sick feeling was heavy on my stomach. I did not look forward to walking into the Ridge, at night, with some sort of crazed animal on the loose. "So, what is the deal with Sully?" I asked the sergeant, attempting to distract myself enough to calm down. Fontaine stopped abruptly, and I nearly ran into him. Again, his green eyes fixed on my own brown. After a minute, Jean-Marc let out a low curse and closed his eyes. "A couple of years ago, he got involved with a woman he should have stayed the hell away from," he began. "She was married." "That isn't really grounds to get fired," I said, raising an eyebrow. "It is when it's the chief's wife." "Oh. Yeah." Fontaine looked at me. "She died in a car wreck. Sully was with her." "Oh my God," I whispered. It was low, even for Sully. Fontaine's voice became harsher. "She should have known better. She belonged to Walker." "Belonged?" Before I could stop myself, I said, "Maybe that was the problem." I lifted my chin in defiance. Maybe she didn't want to belong to someone. Maybe she wanted to. "She was his wife," the sergeant snapped, his Creole accent thick. "You marry one of us, that come with responsibility, especially if you married to the chief." "That sounds like some macho bullshit to me," I snapped back, narrowing my eyes, trying to look as intimidating as possible. "She was a person. She may have been cheating on her husband, but she didn't deserve to die." Jean-Marc blinked, stared at me for a moment, then sighed. "I never said she did. Doesn't change the fact that bad choices put her in that car. Sully was, and is, a piece of shit. Connie knew that, but she went and..." He trailed off. "Look, I get loyalty, but that doesn't give you the right to judge someone else's wife." He met my gaze, and I saw a deep sadness in his eyes. "I'm not judging her, Cher," he said, looking away from me. "I'm mad as hell at her for leaving us the way she did." "Us?" I asked, confused. The green eyes of the sergeant shone under a streetlight, and it was a long moment before he looked at me again. "She was my sister." I'm so sorry." I didn't," I stammered. "No, you didn't. Fontaine said and sighed. We got a job to do, newbie. We can fight later. He smiled and gave me a wink. You're pretty cute when you're mad, you know that, Cher? My mouth fell open, and with a satisfied look on his face, he turned and started walking again. I felt my face flush, then took a deep breath and followed. The air grew heavy as we approached the train tracks. The buzzing was causing my head to ache a little, and I wanted to throw up. There was the sound of footsteps approaching behind us, and I turned to see Rodriguez and another officer jogging towards us. I recognized the latter as Jacob Tyrell, another big man. He was tall and broad. His sandy blonde hair was tucked under a backward-facing cap. "Hiya, Sam," he said to me, then nodded to Fontaine. "What's up, Sarge?" "Nothing good," Fontaine said flatly. Tyrell nodded again. Chief and Marty are patrolling the perimeter. Fontaine let out a gruff sound of affirmation and turned to Rodriguez. "Mama okay?" "She's got it under control, JM. Says to tell you she's praying for us," Louise said, "and to come home safe or we have to answer to her." When I stepped over the tracks onto the ridge, the buzzing sound ceased and the nausea vanished. Instead, my flesh broke out into goose pimples, and my senses seemed to scream in overstimulation. The street lights were suddenly almost too bright, my clothes a little too warm. There was a stench wafting through the air of rotten eggs and roadkill. I could taste my own sweat mixed with the dirt in my mouth. I could hear our uniforms shuffle, our feet crunching the asphalt below, but nothing else. There should have been night sounds, dogs barking, or a passing car, but it was silent. It felt as though I was walking in a vacuum. I looked at my surroundings. Most of the structures beyond the tracks were abandoned and decrepit. There were hollowed-out husks of what once were homes. The roads were filled with potholes and deep cracks in the sidewalks. Almost every lawn was either dirt or dried and dying grass, no matter the time of year. Trees were sparse and devoid of foliage. "I'm never going to get used to it," Tyrell said behind me. "The place just gives me the creeps." "It ain't so bad," Rodriguez chimed in. Most of the time, anyway. "I don't like it," Tyrell sniffled. "Feels like I'm gonna jump out of my own skin." "That's what the ridge wants, mon ami," Fontaine said. "It wants you to let go. Give in to your instincts." "The ridge what?" I paused and looked at him. Rodriguez and Tyrell exchanged nervous glances. Jean-Marc turned to me, his eyes smoldering. "This place, it does things to you." His Creole accent was much stronger than a few minutes before, his voice deeper. "Brings things out of you, things you want, your desires. Don't you feel it, Cher?" "What the hell are you talking about?" I said, unable to breathe. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, Cher." Fontaine smiled, licking his lips. His eyes slowly drifted over my body. I felt hot. My heart pounded. He looked like a predator and I was his prey. I wanted to run. I wanted him to chase me. Even worse, there was a very strong part of me that wanted him to catch me. "We was gonna ease you in, but looking like we popping your cherry hard and fast." He licked his lips again. "Oh, baby, it might hurt like hell, but I promise, once you let go, it's gonna feel real, real good." The grin on his face grew impossibly wider, and he moved towards me. Fear brought my hormones back to reality. I tightened my grip on my gun, but didn't raise it. I didn't want to risk the officers getting trigger-happy. "Whoa there, Sam," Rodriguez said. His eyes were on my sidearm, and he had moved so that he was between me and Fontaine. "JM, are you all right? I think you're scaring her a little." Fontaine snapped his eyes to Rodriguez and glared. Louise raised his hands, palms out. "Hey, I'm just looking out for you, man. I know Mama wanted you to get to know each other a little better, but she would definitely not approve of this method of communication." Fontaine bared his teeth at Rodriguez. "Look at her, JM." "She thinks you're going to hurt her," Louise said calmly. He looked at me, then furrowed his eyebrows and pinched the bridge of his nose. Shaking his head, he uttered a curse under his breath. "Sorry, Cher, He looked at me. pain in his eyes. You ain't ready. I was feeling so many things at once. It was a mix of fear, confusion, and desire. Ready for what? I asked in a voice that didn't sound like my own. We'll talk, Cher. He glanced over me one last time and looked away. Later. I opened my mouth to press further, but a scream came from behind one of the ruined buildings, and all four of us ran toward the sound on instinct. Weapons drawn, we approached in a staggered formation. Fontaine at the front, Tyrell covering the rear. To my relief, Rodriguez kept himself between me and Fontaine. I didn't know what the hell was going on with the sergeant, but they had a job to do, and I needed to be able to focus. The sound of cracking bones and the scent of blood accompanied the screams. A rumbling growl of a very big animal could also be heard. The buzzing sounds began to ring in my ears, and this time in the form of words. Whispering at first, too faint to hear. The closer they got to the location of the screams, the voices grew louder and more clear. Finally, it was like someone else's thoughts were invading my own. Die, bastard. I gasped and teetered for a moment, and Rodriguez steadied me. It's okay, Sam. We hear it too. Louise's voice had cleared my mind, and I looked over to my fellow officer. He wasn't looking at me, his lips still pressed in a hard line. I swallowed and looked away. I kept running. The screams becoming more desperate and the growling more violent. We were getting closer. The screams grew louder as we ran alongside a building. I smell her, Fontaine. We all came to a halt. Started to shake so bad it took every ounce of me to hold onto my gun. We were at the very edge of the building the screams were coming from. The growling ceased and the screams died down to whimpers. I can smell her, came the voice. It must be driving you insane. You touch her. Jean-Marc's voice bellowed in my mind, and I jumped back. I snapped my head to the sergeant. His shoulders were tensed and his face was contorted in a menacing grimace. His eyes, hard, staring into the darkness behind the building. Touch her and I will tear your heart out with my teeth. Laughter echoed into the night, and my throat began to tighten up. Without realizing what I was doing, my mind reached out to Fontaine. I'm afraid. The sergeant's face grew more fierce and he roared. Raw fury pulsed from him. His shoulders shook with rage. Rodriguez and Tyrell closed the gap around me, creating a human shield. The voice came again. Catch me if you can. Then the sound of something heavy bounded across the rear of the building. Fontaine immediately took chase. I called out to him, but Louise held me back. We gotta see who is hurt, Sam. JM can take care of himself. He nodded to Tyrell and we went around to the back of the building. A whimpering sound came from a mangled form against the wall. Entrails stretched from the abdomen. Its face was torn, caked with blood and gravel. The wall above had a drag mark starting out midway, as if whoever it was thrown and slid down the wall, leaving a trail of blood. The thought of a body sliding down the brick surface like a slug on a screen door flashed in my mind and my stomach turned. About time you assholes showed up. The voice was garbled. The person's throat clearly had blood bubbling in their throat. I recognized the voice. Sully? Tyrell knelt down beside the man's body, assessing his wounds. Holy shit, man. Who the hell did this? Bear. Sully coughed and let out a gurgling chuckle, spraying blood over his lips. At least, that's what's going to be on the report, right? Tyrell looked up at Rodriguez. He's hurt bad. We can't risk anyone being on this side of the ridge right now, Rodriguez said flatly. He's right. I'm dead anyway. Sully looked in my direction, a grin on his mangled face. Glad I got to smell you again, sugar. Jean-Marc is one lucky... Rodriguez had stepped over and yanked a piece of glass from Sully's leg and gave the man a hard look. Don't be an asshole on your way out, man, he said. Sully moved his body in what one would consider a shrug. Old dogs, new tricks. He laughed out a hacking cough. He smelt her too. He wanted Jean-Marc to follow. Damn fool. Sully then let out a loud moan and started to shake violently. It's... Sully's hand shot out and grabbed Tyrell by the shoulder strap, pulling him down closer. He then whispered something in the officer's ear and went limp. His eyes moved up towards me, and he smiled, before his eyes glazed over, and he was dead. What did he say? I asked, staring down at the dead man. What did he tell you? Benny, Tyrell said, standing and wiping his hand on his pants. Benny Hardwick. You did this. Rodriguez's voice popped into my head. Walker. Jean-Marc is chasing the perp. We are going to follow. Pack needed. A howl in the distance sounded, followed by another, and then another. Every nerve in my body was tingling, and my heart raced wildly in my chest. A sudden heat spread all over me as Fontaine's voice filled my senses. Protect, mate. Tyrell and Rodriguez had stripped off their gear and were tearing out of their clothes. I stared in morbid fascination as the muscles in the two men's body rippled and stretched. Their limbs started to elongate, and both men roared as their facial features contorted, and their white teeth grew large and pointed. They fell in a heap on all fours and arched their backs. Their human voices morphed into howls as fur sprouted over their naked, distorted bodies, and claws stretched as their fingers fused. Two wolves stood before me, and I stared in disbelief. One of them, a large black wolf, lowered his head to me. Come, said Rodriguez's voice in my head. Without hesitation, I immediately mounted the wolf, gripping its neck as it rose. Hold on. Louise's voice rang out again, as he and the tawny wolf that was once Tyrell gave chase, their howls echoing into the night. The landscape became a blur as the wind blew my autumn hair out of its bun. It flowed wildly behind me, dancing like a battle flag. My heartbeat thrummed in my chest, and I gripped the nape of the black wolf's neck. Another howl sang out, and the great wolves froze, their ears perked. I tipped my own head, trying to track the sound. There, the wolves were off again, tearing through lawns, claws scraping the pavement. The wolves bounded up the front steps of a large, abandoned school building, busting through the double doors of the entrance. With a grace I didn't know I had, I leapt off the black wolf and landed on the concrete floor, and then broke out into a run, the wolves on my heels. I took twists and turns through the school, concentrating on any sign of Fontaine. A loud crash came from one side, and I rushed towards another set of doors, slamming my body into it. It didn't budge. I beat my fist against the doors in frustration. Move! Tyrell's voice came to me, and I sidestepped split second before the tawny wolf crashed through the wall, supporting the doors. The black wolf sailed past me and through the wall, and I scrambled over the rubble and into what used to be the gym. In the middle of an ancient basketball court, two beasts were locked in combat. The smaller of the two, a silver wolf, was crouched in a defensive position and trying to attack the other beast from below. The larger of the two, a massive bear-like creature, its fur was a golden yellow color, its eyes red-rimmed and pitch black, with claws like carving knives. The beast slashed through the air at the silver wolf. I flinched as another swipe barely grazed the wolf on the shoulder. I screamed Jean-Marc's name, just as the black and tawny wolves leapt onto the enormous bear's back. The bear shrugged the wolves off, and the silver wolf took the opportunity and went for the bear's throat. The bear dodged, then took one massive paw and backhanded the silver wolf, sending him flying into the bleachers. The other two wolves began to attack the bear again, as it swatted at them like flies. I ran, skinning to my knees, just as I reached the silver wolf and placed my hands on its large muzzle. No! I cried. Jean-Marc, damn it, get up! The wolf's eyes fluttered open, and its green eyes, Fontaine's eyes, looked into mine. Protect, mate. A sergeant's voice drifted into my mind. The silver wolf rose. He straightened his legs and stood atop my still kneeling form, creating a barrier of long silver legs. Fontaine. A voice that vaguely resembled Benny Hardwick said, "You should thank me. I got to her before the outcast could." The bear continued to defend itself from the onslaught of the two other wolves, but faced the silver wolf and I. Its maw, dripping with bloody drool, was curled into what looked like a grotesque smile. He would have defiled her, like he did your horse sister. A deep rumble came from the chest above me, and I glared at the bare thing. "Watch your mouth, you Teddy Ruxpin-looking psycho." My voice echoed in my head, and the silver wolf sneezed. The voice that was not quite Benny laughed. "I'm going to enjoy tearing her flesh." At that, the silver wolf charged forward, letting out a snarl, leaving me at the bleachers. The other two wolves fell into formation behind him, and all three crouched in an attack position. Their hackles raised, illuminated from the light coming from the skylight above. The bear paced in front of the wolves, the freakish grin still on its face. "Filthy mutts," Benny's voice came. "Your kind disgust me. Incompetent dogs. False guardians." The voice screamed with rage. "Where were you when my kid needed you?" "We protect the barrier," Sergeant Fontaine's voice echoed. "You and yours are forbidden beyond the reg in immortal form. You know the law." "Law?" The creature let out another ear-splitting roar and reared up on its hind legs. "There is no law, only vengeance, and it will be mine." Without thinking, I got to my feet and ran to place myself between the silver wolf and the bear. "What the hell are you doing?" Fontaine's voice came to me, as the bear readied itself for attack. I held my ground, positioning myself at the silver wolf's throat. "Protecting," I growled. "My mate." We braced ourselves as the demon bear ran full force towards us. Suddenly there was a crash from above and glass from the skylight rained down on us. The silver wolf stood over me, shielding me from most of the debris. Through the fur, dust, and collateral damage, I could see two more wolves entering the fray. One had chestnut brown fur and dark almond-colored eyes. "Man, you all started the party without us?" A voice I recognized as Officer Martin Davis chimed in my head, and the chestnut wolf threw his head back in a howl. Standing in nose-to-nose with Benny the monster bear was a great white wolf. Its sheer mass dwarfed over the other wolves. Its muscles moved visibly through the thick, snowy fur as it moved. I looked at the white wolf's eyes, one brown, one gray, and held my breath. "Walker," it was the bear's voice. "I've been waiting for you." "Ursid," the voice of Chief Walker boomed in my ears. "You crossed over the barrier with the intention of causing harm to my people and mortals. The penalty is death." "Death? Penalty?" The demon bear roared in rage. "What about those who would harm my kind, my kin? They were not punished. They lived while my flesh and blood died like a common animal on a mortal highway." The Ursid snorted in disgust. "Humans threw him into a ditch to be fed on lowly creatures. Speak to me again about law, Alpha, and I will be sure you join your unfaithful bitch." The white wolf stared at the Ursid, seemingly unmoved by its rantings. Static filled my ears. The wolves around me began to howl. Walker's voice broke through the white noise, and baying beasts. "Show him no mercy." I fell backwards as the wolves stormed the bear, burying it in fur, tooth, and claw. I saw golden fur and flesh fly through the air. I skidded back on my bottom, trying to keep splatter from hitting my shoes. Flashes of white teeth, stained with crimson, fur matted with blood. The sound of tearing flesh, furious growls, were drowned out slightly by the cries of rage and pain of the Ursid. The carnage thundered off the walls. My stomach began to lurch, and I looked away. I curled into a fetal position and covered my ears. When silence finally came, it was almost deafening. "Cher?" Jean-Marc's voice, his human voice, came to me. It's over, Cher. I started to cry, my body shaking. I felt fingertips on my forehead. We gonna go now, Cher. Mama gonna take a good look at you. I tightened my arms around myself when I felt him try to slide his hand under my knees. Please, Cher. I felt him place a kiss on my head. You ain't gotta open your eyes if you don't wanna. But let me get you out of here, eh? My lips trembled, but I relaxed my body and allowed Jean-Marc to lift me off the glass-covered floor. I could smell the sweat, dirt, and blood on his skin. I heard the cracking of glass underfoot all around me. I reactively winced at every step. I barely remember the ride to the clinic. Adios, mios, I heard Gloria Rodriguez exclaim. Jean-Marc put something in room 2. Then going to go join the rest of these mongrels and get cleaned up so I can see to your wounds properly. There was a pause, then. And you didn't call me and let me know you were coming. I was worried. What about all your uniforms, huh? It's freezing outside and you all have your cojones flapping around. Sorry, Mama, I heard them all say in unison, as I felt myself being carried away and lifted gently onto what I thought felt like an exam table. I heard Fontaine whisper softly, Mama gonna come in and make sure you're all right. I'm just gonna be right out here. We can talk when you're ready. A moment later, a door shut. I opened my eyes to a brightly lit exam room. I sat up on the table and brought my knees to my chest. I was filthy. My hands had scrapes and cuts all over them. I laid my head on my knees and gently rocked back and forth. Gloria came in, followed by Walker. The older woman had brought towels and washcloths and a change of clothes. Walker had showered, his dark hair still glistening. He placed a bucket of water on the sink of the exam room and turned to walk out the door. He paused at the frame and without turning said, Your dad would have been proud of you tonight, and walked out of the room. Fresh tears welled up in my eyes. Man of many words, Gloria said, smiling. Now, Chica, let us get you cleaned up and changed out of those dirty clothes. I sat limply on the table as Gloria took a washcloth and, with all the gentleness that a mother possesses, cleaned as much of the grime off of me as she could. She helped me into the clean clothes. The older woman produced a comb and began to detangle my long, auburn locks. I never had a daughter, just Louise. Please let me know if I'm hurting you. I nodded, and Gloria smiled. You didn't know what you were, did you? I looked at the older woman. What I was? What you are. Gloria knelt in front of me and held my hands in her own. You're one of them. I don't know what that means. I don't know what is happening to me. My lip trembled. I don't even know how I feel about Fontaine. I barely know him, and he's my superior officer. This probably looks so bad. I can lose my job, and it'll be all right. You will have answers in due time. Gloria rose, lifting me up with her. And as far as barely knowing Jean-Marc, you can fix that right now. Gloria took me down the hall and into a waiting room where Fontaine was standing at a window. Hi, I said softly, walking into the room. Cher. His voice cracked a little. I will let you talk, Gloria said, then left without another word. Jean-Marc rubbed the back of his neck. I want to apologize. I was out of line there. It's okay. Hell if it is, Mark said with gritted teeth. You were mine. I was supposed to be protecting you. I could have lost you because I was thinking with my... I am not yours, I interrupted. Now wait a damn minute. I do believe I heard you tell Benny Bear that I was your mate. Got all possessive on me. Honestly, considering the circumstances, it was kind of a turn-on. I rolled my eyes. Look, I don't really know how I feel, or what is even happening. I'm not just going to jump into this like a damsel in some urban fantasy. I sighed. I need a little time to process. Fontaine lowered his head. Yeah, I mean, you're right. He locked his green eyes on my brown. We got time, Cher. Am I interrupting anything? A deep voice came from the doorway. We turned and Chief Walker was leaned against the wall with his broad arms crossed in front of his chest. No, sir, we said in unison. You both did good tonight, he began. Unfortunately, this isn't over yet. The sergeant raised an eyebrow. That Ursid was executed. It don't get more over than that. There were 2 different DNA samples taken from the scene where the arm was found. One was Hank Edwards, and the other is an unsub. Jean-Marc looked at Walker. Meaning we got something else out there? Walker nodded. Benjamin Hardwick's son was hit by a speeding vehicle while in his Ursid form 2 years ago. The driver of that car was Constance Fontaine Walker. Fontaine scowled. Right. Still not following. Walker turned to look at me. Baby bear, Papa bear. My eyes grew wide as realization struck home. A second later, Fontaine caught up. Oh shit, he said. Mama bear is still out there.